It's probably about 15 after, and then, oh, we only have 45 minutes left. Well, anyway, that's about it. We're going to put a tag ending on chapter 47 and go into 48. I was contemplating going all the way through 49, but there's too much. I guess first I ought to say to all those who have joined in online, welcome. I'm glad that you're listening and looking forward to studying with you. Hopefully all of you have an outline and you got that okay. What I was going to say is the more and I guess maybe just because of where I was in studying in this section, over the years I've had people tell me, well, all we need is the Bible. You don't need all those extra books to study from and this and that. And that's just a dumb comment. There are too many things that you say, what does that mean? What did that mean in their culture? That's just a dumb comment. And then others who have said, well, we just studied the New Testament because we're under the New Covenant. That's another dumb comment. You can't understand the new that well without the old, and to see how they tie together and what was intended in all of that. So studying in through the end of 47 and through 48 and stuff, and I'm just pretty sure I'm going to only get about halfway tonight, and I'll finish it up next week, because there's just a lot of good stuff in here. And it's, I think it's probably things that you've never studied before. Nobody's ever shown it to you. You may not have even observed it in your reading, or if you did, you thought, that's just weird. I wonder what that means. Then go on and, go from there. So anyway, preacher friend of mine was telling the story how he was at a gas station and there was a long line of people getting ready to go out for one holiday weekend, and they're all lined up. And this was years ago. And the attendant asked a preacher friend, he said, why is it that when people know they're going on a long trip, they don't plan ahead for that trip? And the preacher said, I've got the same problem in my line of work. You know you're going to make a long trip, but you don't plan ahead, and it's kind of sad because, we're going to make that trip. Some of the little sayings that come up that they're interesting, but, it depends how you take them, that we're all born terminal. That's true, but sometimes that's just, it's almost a fatalistic way we have. Well, we're all going to die. And it gets more negative when you say stuff like, well, life's tough and then you die. And that's true too. But, it's rather cold. And I think a lot of those phrases come from people who really haven't thought ahead, let alone planned ahead for a trip they're going to have to make. And I don't know. And then I thought about the idea that, boy, when you have to bury one of your loved ones, that's difficult. Here in this case, having to bury your father. There are a lot of people who've had to do that kind of thing, and it's just, it touches you. You remember where you were, you remember what you were doing, you remember the things that were going on. Leaves a distinct memory. And I think in Joseph's case, it was meant to do that, but not just for his sake, for his family's sake, for his brother's sake, and their families, and for all the descendants of Israel. It's recorded there for us. And I don't think you can really study the life of Joseph without looking at the death of his father. When you look at Abraham, it talks about his dying. Isaac talks about his dying. Jacob comes along, and it's going to talk about his dying. Interesting thing about the patriarchal age, though, when you study on it, they didn't approach death the way that we do. and it's not a matter of right or wrong. It's just their way was different. Because to them, it wasn't just a time of losing someone. It was also a time about learning. And I think a lot of ways, if we took a page out of their book, we'd be better off. In our culture, we approach things like that so different. When a child is born, the birth experience, everybody likes to get in on that and well-wishing and all those kind of things. But in dying, a little bit different story. We kind of leave that to the professionals anymore. Either that or professionals have convinced us we need to do that. I don't know if anybody listening is in on funeral business, but I was in it for long enough to know it's a racket. It really is. They will. Oh, I tell you what, they do okay, but anyway, I don't want to get into that one. I'll get in trouble for sure. You remember there was a time in our country when if you died in your home, they had what they called a wake, and you'd stay around, da-da-da-da-da. You could still learn from something like that, when people came to visit the body and that sort of thing. And now when you turn it over to professionals, you really don't learn anything. They don't tell you anything about your family, your life, your faith, and it's just a matter of kind of comforting those who are left behind, not really a teaching experience. And I don't know, it's not a matter of right and wrong, it's just that's the way it is. So anyway, and then on the other hand, a lot of our modern technology and medicine and stuff like that has enhanced the length of our lives. We live longer, and I don't want to do that. So hopefully I don't want to live a whole long life, and do all that thing. But death is something that happens for the family, and we all have to deal with it. When in the patriarchal time, when somebody died, they would call the family together, and they would stay around the bed, sometimes for minutes, sometimes for days. And they would talk with one another, especially the one who was about to die. They would learn something from it, all the way up even to the moment of passing. They would be aware of that. And it made the last days of the one who was living significant, not just, well, they're on their last leg. Sometimes you could do as much teaching when you're dying back then as you could when you were alive. You can do more than a preacher could to help you. In this section, at the end from chapter 47 on, we're going to look at 3 visits. 3 visits that are made from Joseph to his dad who was dying. And I think in some ways one fellow was right when he said, when you read these carefully and study it, you learn about living in one's dying. You're not to be isolated, removed. And that's why I entitled the lesson, Dying to Learn. When you're dying, you should be learning about something that's in there. So anyway, let's look at the first visit and verses 28 through 31. I'm actually going to start at verse 27 and go to the end of chapter 47. It says, Israel settled in the land of Egypt, in the region of Goshen. They acquired property in it and became fruitful and very numerous. Now Jacob lived in the land of Egypt 17 years, and his lifespan was 147 years. When the time approached for him to die, he called his son Joseph and said to him, if I have found favor with you, and to me that's just, really? If I have found favor with you? There's a lot going on there over the years and stuff. Anyway, put your hand under my thigh. Promise me that you will deal with me in kindness and faithfulness. maybe in some ways you can say, well, when somebody's dying, they're going to make some requests now. There's some things to look at. And what's said here is, do not bury me in Egypt. That's the big favor he has to ask. When I rest with my fathers, carry me away from Egypt and bury me in their burial place. And Joseph answered and said, I will do what you have asked. And Jacob said, swear to me. So Joseph swore to him. Then Israel bowed in thanks at the head of his bed. That's an interesting phrase, and we'll look at that in just a minute. But look at the length of Jacob's life. 140, there's one way of saying 147 years is a long time to live. The way things are going, I would say now 147 years is a long time to be sentenced to life on planet Earth. That's a long stretch. And Jacob says if, he had said earlier, if such and such happens, it's going to bring the gray hair of my head down to Sheol in sorrow. He'd been saying that for years, even before he went to Egypt. That old codger lived to be 147 years old. I remember my dad used to say, well, I'm not going to live past 30. I'm not going to live past 40. I'm not going to live past 50. And I'd tell him, you know what, Dad, I'm going to go to 200 just to spite you. I don't want to live that long either. So anyway, my grandmother was 6 months shy of being 100. And if it wasn't for a tragic accident, she would have made it. She was tough. So anyway, a lot of interesting things going on there. I think maybe in some ways with Jacob, as he said that over and over and over, you're going to bring my gray hair down to Sheol. I'm going to die. It's going to kill me. And this, they may have learned to just kind of roll their eyes. Well, Dad's at it again, talking about his dying. But it's interesting here, you start to notice some things. It says Israel settled in the land of Egypt. I'm not sure if we're talking about, there's no nation formed as such yet. But it's the first time you see Jacob in conjunction with all of his family, and they're all called Israel. The covenant name is being used. And God hasn't forgotten his promise to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. They're still the covenant people, no matter where they find themselves. Their nation is not marked by geopolitical borders. It's marked by people. It's marked by promises. And I think one of the saddest things about the nation of Israel was even after they came back from the Exodus, from there on, even into today, they still want to think in terms of borders and not covenant promises. But they forgot the covenant promises long ago, and I'll comment on that a little bit as we go through. It's not about borders of land. When you look in the New Testament and talks about Israel, it switches over to become the church. There's a term that a lot of people like to use now in denominational world especially, and it's influenced us, and they talk about replacement theology. And they do that because they view Israel as getting another chance to come back at the end of time, and they'll reign again in Israel and all 1,000-year reign. And they say the church was just a replacement until that time for Israel. That's not true. God finished with Israel back in AD 70, destroyed all the records of their genealogy, and that's a wonderful study just in itself. But until then, at this particular point in time, they're down in Egypt. They've settled in Goshen. They've taken possession of it as Pharaoh told them to do. It's not the land of promise, but it's interesting they've gained the land because Egypt has lost that land now. Remember, they sold the land so that they could have grain, and all that went on. They finally gave themselves to Pharaoh as his slaves. Israel, on the other hand, begins to multiply. Moses wrote and said that they're fruitful, they're growing. Joseph holds on to the covenant because Jacob wants him to do that. And that Jacob holds on to that covenant promise. But you know, Joseph does too. Look at what he named his sons. We go back and look at that study again, and they didn't have anything to do with living in Egypt. The ultimate is going to be seen in the whole purpose of him coming to Egypt. And 400 years later, when Israel leaves Egypt. But one of the interesting things about it saying that Jacob lived 17 years there, it's not just, wasn't that sweet? God gave him 17 more years to be around his family and his son Joseph he'd lost for, 20. No, that's not why. I believe it's because God wanted him to be able to see his promise coming true to Jacob. You're going to be fruitful. You're going to grow in numbers. You're going to grow in possessions. I'm faithful to you in my promises, Jacob. And Jacob got to see that in watching them. So in verses 29 and 30 through 31, he makes a request. Jacob makes a request. About to die. Calls his son in. And he's had all these years to enjoy down in Egypt. Now 17 more years. But what he wants them to realize is, it looks good. You're prospering. You've got land. You've got possessions. Families are growing. But this isn't where we belong. God's got a better place in store for you. And I wish we could learn that. I wish we'd learn that today and get that. We don't belong here. We're passing through. Whatever you've got, you can enjoy, but don't get too caught up in all of it. Jacob never forgot that he was a Hebrew. And he makes that clear in what he says to Joseph. Doesn't matter how bad things were in Canaan. Doesn't matter how good they appear to be in Egypt. This is not what God had in store for them, especially in the long run. Jacob never forgot that Egypt was just a place he was visiting. Even though it's a long visit, it'll be for his family, for his descendants, but he wants them well aware they don't belong in the land of Egypt. Don't forget your commitment to the covenant that God has made you. He promised you the land in Canaan, and he will fulfill that. It's amazing to me how some people can start building something and they never live to see the completion of what they're building. You can look throughout Europe and some of those old cathedrals and castles and things like that. They would start them and it would go on for like 100 and 150 years building them. And the guys who started never got to see the finished product. We look back on it, we see the pictures of it, maybe you visited there, and you see that. But it's even more important when you see that spiritually in the way that's taking place. And it's kind of interesting because the Egyptians had a process of embalming that would preserve the body. It would hold it together. And for Jacob's case, it's going to hold it together while they make that procession all the way back and bury him back in the promised land like he wanted. The Hebrews have always had a very strong sense of nationalism. It's still evident. I remember when I was in the service and the Second Arab-Israeli War broke out in 1973, you had Jewish people from the United States. They dropped whatever they were doing and they went to Israel to fight for their country, for their beliefs, what they held to. They have a very strong, it's misguided, but that's another story. Jacob is telling Joseph, I want to be buried at home. I don't want to be buried here. In some ways, it doesn't matter, when you look at you and me today and where we are, it doesn't matter where we're buried. There's no place on this earth that's really home, Vicky's family has a plot down in East Texas, an area down there where Cogburns are buried. And they buy their plot and, they send money in to upkeep those and things like that. And am I in that plot or not yet? No, not yet? It figures. Anyway, I just dump me to the wind. Take those ashes and throw them out. I don't know what's going to. But anyway, I almost forgot what I was going to say here. Jacob wants to be buried at home, and he tells Joseph that. And he tells Joseph, place your hand under my thigh. And that was a matter of a highly respected, reverent promise. We look at that and say, thigh, okay. If you literally translate that, they would put the hand on the genitals of the person because of what it represented. There are passages in the Bible, if we read them for what they literally mean, we'd spend all day blushing just because we read things in such a prudish way and not the way that God gave them to us in the Scriptures. But the promise has to do with the burial of Jacob's bones. Don't bury me here. The last time we saw that kind of a promise, Abraham had told his servant when he went looking for a wife for his son, promise me you're not going to let him marry a Canaanite woman. And he made him take the same vow on doing that. The country he's in, where he's going to die, he's just visiting. And it's just like where we are now. We're just visiting here. It doesn't matter. And verse 31 is really beautiful. Swear to me. Joseph swore to him. He took an oath. He made a promise to his father. Then Israel bowed in thanks, not to Joseph, but to God. And this translation says at the head of his bed. Other translations say at the head of his staff. And that's more the idea. The old man is leaning on his staff. They say, well, he was too feeble, to get out of bed and lay down on the floor. And their beds didn't have headboards, so I don't know what the head was and what the foot was, but, they laid down and they slept. Anyway, it's not worth getting into a crazy discussion on that. But he's worshiping Jehovah God, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac. I may still be in Egypt, but I'm a Hebrew. I worship Jehovah God. I want to be buried where Abraham and my father Isaac are buried. James Dobson wrote that when his father died, on his headstone, they put two words. He prayed. I think that's pretty cool. There are a lot of people who would say about their dad, he left, he drank, something like that. Joseph would say about his father, if he was going to put two words about Jacob, he worshiped. Whatever else he did, and he made a lot of mistakes, he worshiped God. And it might be kind of interesting to ask, what kind of words we'd like on our headstone, but that'd take up a whole another lesson in sermon, so we won't do that. But there is an application here. You can't escape the realities of death. I don't care who you hire, how much you put into it and everything else. We're going to die. Hebrews 9:27 says it's appointed unto a man once to die, and then comes judgment. You have to die. Unless you're alive when the Lord comes back in 1 Thessalonians 4, and then you're going to get caught up and translated. But other than that, everybody's going to die. It's something that we all must do. The question isn't if you're going to die, it's when you're going to die. And the question really isn't even when. The question is how you're going to die. I learned a long time ago, you're going to die the same way you lived. Think about that one. If you're a bitter person, you'll die bitter. If you're a cold, rude, harsh person to other people, when you live, that's where you're going to die. You won't have a lot of friends around your bed when you go either. If you're a person who believes, you'll die believing, worshiping. So it wasn't that unnatural for Jacob to summon a little bit of strength that he had and worship on that staff. He'd been living that way for 147 years, so why not die that way if that's what's going to happen? You know, illness really doesn't change people all that much. It brings out what they really are as far as their character is concerned. And again, there's a lot you can say about that, and a lot of directions you can go, but we won't do that. If you want to die a religious, godly person, live like one. That's really about the best way to put it. You know, you're going to die. When? Don't know. How? You have complete control over how you're going to die. Godly or ungodly. You know, one of the things about you find as you get older is certain priorities come to the surface and they become much clearer. You know, for Jacob, it was inheriting the promises of God, the obligations of the covenant, passing it on to his sons and their families, their descendants. And Joseph, when he makes the vow, when he takes the oath and swears to take his father to Canaan, he's not just making a promise to make an old man happy. One of the most powerful things to see here is they both know the Lord is working out his purpose. And they can't be content with anything less than obedience. That is the promised land up there. That's where he wants his people to live and die. Take him home and bury him. Now, I don't have all the answers. Never claimed to, wouldn't even think about doing that. For 400 years, people are going to live and they're going to die in the land of Egypt who are God's people. I don't understand all of that. Other than to say, you know what? With Jacob and Joseph, it's a matter of the covenant and the promises of fulfilling that for God's big picture purpose. But for all the people under there, it's a reminder to you and me, it doesn't matter where you die at, as long as you die in the Lord. That's the only thing that really counts on that. Second visit comes in chapter 48. And this is really this is the second time Joseph goes to visit with his father in verses 1 through 21. We're going to read a few of them here and there and then keep on going. Look at verses 1 through 12. Sometime after this, Joseph was told, "Your father is weaker." So he set out with his two sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. When Jacob was told, "Your son has come to you," Israel summoned his strength and sat up in bed. On something like this, when Joseph is told your father is weaker, he doesn't just go to see his father, he goes with his sons. They were expected to do that. It was a show of respect and a show of love. Jacob said to Joseph, "God Almighty appeared to me at Luz." There's some phrases I want you to see if you notice. We're going to come back and talk to them. "He appeared to me at Luz in the land of Canaan and blessed me. He said to me, I will make you fruitful and numerous. I will make many nations come from you. And I will give this land as a permanent possession to your future descendants. Your two sons born to you in the land of Egypt before I came to you in Egypt are now mine. Ephraim and Manasseh belong to me, just as Reuben and Simeon do. Children born to you after them will be yours and will be recorded under the names of their brothers with regard to their inheritance. When I was returning from Padan, to my sorrow, Rachel died along the way, some distance from Ephrath in the land of Canaan. I buried her there along the way to Ephrath, that is Bethlehem. When Israel saw Joseph's son, he said, Who are these? And Joseph said to his father, These are my sons God has given me. So Israel said, Bring them to me and I will bless them. Now his eyesight was poor because of old age. He could hardly see. Joseph brought them to him and he kissed and embraced them. Israel said to Joseph, I never expected to see your face again. But now God has even let me see your offspring. Then Joseph took them off from his father's knees and bowed his face to the ground. A lot of things that are interesting about this passage. For one thing, Joseph's sons now are probably in their 20s, Okay? They're young men setting their own course, their own direction in life. They're also half Egyptian. They're also big boys to be sitting on Grandpa's knees. But they didn't sit on his knees. They actually came and they stood between his knees. And that was the way they did that for a sign of respect. Joseph's 147 years old, and he summoned the strength. Joseph and the boys go to him. It's interesting here, Joseph is not the oldest one. Reuben is. When you're dying, you call for the head of the clan. He didn't call for Reuben. He called for Joseph. He's telling them, for all practical purposes now, Joseph is the head of the clan. And he's also passing the baton, if you will, as head of the clan to Joseph. You're the head of the clan now. You watch over the family. You have the leadership of this family. His father reminds him of the covenant. It includes a reminder about the land that they need to be in, the seed, being fruitful. And Joseph has no idea, and Jacob doesn't either really, of that the promise he speaks of has such a intricate and far-reaching application as it does. You can't even imagine that. And you and I know, as we look back and read the Bible, that these promises all come to fruition and focus with the Christ, the promised seed. And he's the one who inaugurates a new and everlasting covenant. Jacob informs Joseph, though, about his intent to adopt Ephraim and Manasseh. And there's some interesting things about adoption we're going to talk about in a minute. Joseph wants to instill in them a deep appreciation for the heritage of the Hebrew people. Joseph is making sure they get more opportunity to spend with Grandpa, with Jacob. But what Jacob did, I think, surprised Joseph. He adopted Joseph's sons as his own. They're as much his sons as Reuben and any of the others. Matter of fact, even more so, because when you look at it, they're going to displace Reuben. There's no tribe of Reuben when they come into the promised land. There's a tribe of Ephraim, and there's a tribe of Manasseh, but there's no tribe of Reuben. There's no tribe of Joseph either. So it's going to be interesting to watch and see how this breaks down. That's why anybody who says, well, all you need is a Bible study. No, there's more than that you need to help you see some of these things. I think maybe when he makes the promise to adopt them and he crosses the boys' arms over one another, there might have been a flashback to a memory back in Genesis 27 when he stole the birthright from his older brother Esau. I wonder if he thought about that. But this is a different setting. There's no deception going along here. He's no longer Jacob the chiseler, the ankle grabber. There's no deception. But they become as much his sons as Reuben, Simeon, and any of the other boys. Joseph's brothers probably wouldn't have considered them as being as much Jacob's sons. But when Jacob spoke, that was the word and that was the law, if you will. And adopting Joseph's two sons means they're going to get a double portion because they're being adopted as the sons of the oldest. There's a lot going on here that that you don't get it when you just read that. It's like, oh, that's some serious stuff. Joseph's been special all of his life to Jacob. Now he makes Joseph's two sons his. He gives them a portion of inheritance. They're going to receive twice as much as the other boys. On both sides of the river, too, when it comes to that time. Look at verse 13. Joseph took them both with his right hand, Ephraim toward Israel's left. With his left hand, Manasseh toward Israel's right. That's the way it should have been. And brought them to Israel. But Israel stretched out his right hand and put it on the head of Ephraim. He crossed over, the younger. And he put his hand on Manasseh's head, the left one. The right hand is the hand of strength. That indicated, even though Manasseh was the firstborn physically, there's something about Ephraim that Jacob knows that God has maybe revealed to him in some way. And he blesses Joseph and said, the God before whom my fathers Abraham and Isaac walked, the God who has been my shepherd all of my life to this day, the angel who has redeemed me from all harm, may he bless these boys. May they be called by my name and the names of my fathers Abraham and Isaac, and may they grow numerous within the land. Yeah, that's what I wanted to do there. Both of Joseph's sons were born to an Egyptian woman. She's not blood. Well, Ishmael was born to a handmaid of Sarah. He wasn't blood. God sends Ishmael away. He blesses him and said, you're going to be a big nation of yourself and have blessings. But these two, born of an Egyptian woman, he brings them in, their blood. And that's kind of interesting how all that works. And again, I don't have all the answers for that. I'm still trying to figure out all of what's going on. The only thing I can figure is best right now at this point in my study is he knows something about these boys, especially about Ephraim. It has to do with the covenant for eternity. It has to do with this realm and the realm to come. But if I don't understand anything else, I understand this. Covenant's not limited to those descendants according to the flesh. They should have started learning this early in their existence and passed that down. Jesus tried to get the Jews to understand that over and over. You don't have to be born an Israelite by the flesh. Paul would go on to teach not all of Israel is Israel. He would go on to teach in Romans that the church is the new Israel. In Galatians 3:29, Paul reminds us that if you are Christ's, then you are Abraham's offspring, heirs according to the flesh. But there's more than that, because the whole of chapter 3 of Galatians, it's a matter of faith, just like Paul will teach in Romans. There are no other blessings given in the Bible outside of the blessings to Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and even including Joseph, that are going to be a blessing to all of the earth, wherever you are, all ethnic groups. I'm going to make of you many nations, God had told Jacob. And it included a lot more than just a Jewish nation. There are these little insights going on. And I wouldn't expect them as such when they heard these words to say, oh, I guess that means something else later. But you and me, it's different. We got a Bible we can study, we can look back on, and we can see that. And people who come up with this replacement theology and all that other stuff, I don't know how they do it. I don't know how they can draw the conclusion they do. Israel's going to get another, the Jews are going to get another chance at the end of time. I don't know what Bible you're studying, but it wasn't the one that I looking at here, not these 66 books. So, it's interesting when Jacob sends for Joseph. Joseph gets the preeminence. Joseph is going to be let in on a lot of the divine plan. It's interesting, though, there are a couple other little things that come into play here. One of them is, I wonder if Joseph or Jacob thought back to earlier in his life when he had been running from Esau. And he falls asleep and he has a dream about a ladder that goes from earth to heaven. And God spoke to him from the top of that ladder. And Jesus will talk about that in John's Gospel, Jacob's ladder. I wonder if part of that came to mind in that promise. Because Isaac had prayed for El Shaddai, God Almighty, to bless him. And now Jacob understands that it's God Almighty, El Shaddai, who appeared to him at Luz back in chapter 28 as he ran away from Esau. A fellow put it well when he said, the one who named himself Yahweh, the covenant God of Abraham and Isaac, has shown himself powerful to fulfill his word to this homeless youth who's on the run. Blesses each son by name on his deathbed, and each one has a significance as part of the people of Abraham. What I want you to notice, though, and really appreciate, is the threefold description of God that Jacob has here when he blesses Joseph in verse 15. Excuse me. The God before whom my fathers Abraham and Isaac walked. He's the God of his ancestors, Abraham and Isaac. Jacob is no innovator coming up with a new religion like the fake Muhammad in Islam. He's the heir to revelation that was made first to his grandfather, then it was passed to his father, then it comes down to him, and it's going to benefit every future generation, every place on the face of the earth, beyond physical Israel. These are the people that Abraham and his descendants have committed themselves to walking with the Lord, living an exemplary life, pleasing to God. This is the God he's talking about. The God before whom my fathers, Abraham and Isaac, walked, and all of the descendants, either physically who are children of Abraham, spiritually who are children of Abraham. And then he says, the God who has been my shepherd all of my life to this day. He's also Jacob's personal God. He had led him all the way through his life, up to that point that he was speaking. Despite all of his failings in character and conduct, he's aware that his life had purpose and meaning because God had taken him in hand. The wording here is really interesting. The God who has led me, the King James says who has fed me. The Hebrew word means who has shepherded me. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He's the God who has shepherded me. Jacob spent his life shepherding, and he's not slow to recognize God's the ultimate shepherd of caring for us, caring for him in all his experiences. Go home and get a concordance and look up the passages that talk about God as a shepherd, and just enjoy the daylights out of them again. And then this third one's really the mystifying one. The angel who has redeemed me from all harm. That angel appeared to him 3 times, crisis points in his life. At Bethel in chapter 28, Padan Aram in chapter 31, at Peniel in chapter 32. Jacob recognized the angel as being God himself. And so he called the place where he wrestled with wrestled with the angel, the face of God. That's what Peniel means. He was rescued by God from Laban, from Esau, brought him safely. But here's what's really neat. He called him, he was my Redeemer. There's two things about that word that are impressive to me. One is, when you look at Leviticus 25 and Numbers 35, it's one who rescued a relative in time of trouble. You got a relative in trouble, you go and you help him out. But the second thing is, from my understanding, it's a word that's translated hero. The names that are given to Jesus in prophecy in the book of Isaiah. There will be born a woman, everlasting God. Wonderful Redeemer. I can't even remember now how all the verse goes on that. But the word there means hero. The only real hero in the world is God. And Jacob said, when I needed a hero, I called on God. We live in a world that wants to call on all kinds of heroes. We don't have any left anymore. But God's still a hero that wants to be called upon. And there's more than that that's going to be shown when we get into chapter 49 a little bit. There's another interesting thing about this, though. The number of those who are sealed in Revelation chapter 7. Because when you look here at verse 16, that they may grow and be numerous within the land. When you read Revelation chapter 7, it gives you a list of the 12 tribes of Israel, but it's a different list. It's not like you read about in the Old Testament later on when you come into the Promised Land. It's not a list of the 12 land-granted tribes, because that list in Revelation 7 includes Levi. Levi, that's the tribe of priests. They don't have any land. It leaves out Dan in Revelation 7. The list doesn't include Joseph or Manasseh in Revelation 7. It includes Ephraim. There's a lot that goes on in this study that, man, I wish I had time to dig into. But I'm throwing that out there for you that besides just showing us the multi-ethnic nature of God's people, Jew, Gentile, all these different aspects of it, there's so much to look at here. One of the things, for example, when I get people who tell me in the book of Revelation, well, it's going to be a literal city that's going to be built over there in Palestine. City 4 square. It's going to have a city with 12 gates, and on the gates are the names of the 12 apostles. And I like to ask them, who got left off? And they go, what do you mean? There's 13 apostles. Somebody got left off. What do you mean? I said, well, you got all the original 12, and Judas Iscariot hangs himself. He betrayed Jesus. He's replaced by Matthias in Acts chapter 1. And later on, Paul is called as an apostle. And he says he's as much of an apostle as the rest of them are. That's 13 apostles. Who got left off the gates? Maybe it wasn't meant to be taken literally. Maybe it's because there's a truth being taught. It's kind of like, I don't know if I can say this on camera. Yeah, I can. When I talk to the Jehovah's Witnesses, if they really want to dig into things a little bit, I tell them, I know who the 144,000 are. No, you don't. Yes, I do. And you go to that passage in Revelation where it mentions 144,000. They're all men. None of them are married. It says they're all virgins. So I look at them and I'll say, you ain't one of them, Kevin. I'm not one of them. But if it's meant to be taken literal, it's not meant to be taken literal. Yes, sir.
So with the 12 apostles, and then obviously with the 13 apostles, when you say that it's not meant to be taken literally, so the way that I always understood that was that Paul was separate because he was called for a specific purpose.
He was called at a different point in time, but he's as much an apostle as the others are.
Right, but does that still mean
The credentials for an apostle,
Right. No, no.
you had to see the resurrected Jesus
Right.
who appeared to him on the road to Damascus.
Right.
So anything that qualified these others to be apostles, that's what he qualified by.
No, no. What I would 100% agree. I guess that my question is, when you're talking about the 12 gates not to be taken literally, I mean, I guess that just kind of it doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
Well, it's because the city's not meant to be taken. There's not going to be a literal city rebuilt in Palestine.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
For one thing, if you look at the dimensions of the city, the walls are 1,500 miles long, high, and wide. You know how big a city like that would look? And if you put that in Palestine, it would sink.
Yes, sir.
That'd be so heavy. It wasn't meant to be taken. It's a figure of speech representing a truth.
Okay.
That's the whole idea. And the book of Revelation is like that. I probably shouldn't have brought up Revelation 7, but you know, one thing leads to another in my goofy mind. And maybe that's what I should study on Sunday morning sometimes, Revelation. I'd love to study that one. Because that was a whole beautiful, beautiful, powerful study and all that. So anyway, all the way up through 16. And that's what's going on here. In verse 17, the blessing is on Ephraim and Manasseh. Beginning of verse 17, he says, wait, got to turn the page before I can read verse 17. When Joseph saw that his father had placed his right hand on Ephraim's head, he thought it was a mistake. And he took his father's hand to move it from Ephraim's head to Manasseh's. Joseph said to his father, "Not that way, my father. This one is the firstborn." It's kind of like, hey, you know, you're getting kind of old, Pop. You know, maybe you made a mistake. No, I didn't. Put your right hand on his head. But the father refused and said, "I know, my son, I know. He too will become a tribe. He too will be great. Nevertheless, his younger brother will be greater than he, and his offspring will become a populous nation." So he blessed them that day, putting Ephraim before Manasseh, when he said, "The nation Israel will invoke blessings by you, saying, may God make you like Ephraim and Manasseh." Just a little side note, when you studied the Old Testament later on, when they come into the land and they set up, most of the northern region is going to be called the area of Ephraim, because that's how populous Ephraim was and the kind of strength that God, through Jacob, is showing him something that nobody else can see. Joseph, the father, couldn't see that in his own sons. This is what he's going to be, and this is why he needs to be this way. And so he pronounces that, Ephraim and Manasseh. You know, one of the interesting things here, too, is the birth order. And it reminds us again that fleshly birth is not the deciding factor in God's covenant blessings. It's not who's born by what family and flesh and according to this. It's another example of saying God works by grace, not by merit. You know, it's interesting to me, all these denominational groups that tell us, well, you people are trying to get salvation by works. No, we're not. I believe in salvation by grace only, through faith only. And my response to be immersed in water to have my sins forgiven is not a work. I'm letting it be done to me because it's a response of faith. If you ask them, well, do you have to believe Jesus is the Christ? Well, yes, that's something you do. Well, it's a work then. No, it's a response of faith, they'll say. Well, do you have to confess Jesus as Lord? Yes, well, that's something you do. It's a work. No, it's a response of faith, they say. You know, so when it comes to baptism, it doesn't say, and you baptize. It says you be baptized. You submit to it and you let it happen to you. That's the most passive of the bunch as a response of faith. And they can't see that. And what they can't see also is when you look at all of these other churches, all these other denominations, they want to do things on their way, their terms. That's why you have so many churches. That's why Christianity is split up into all these belief systems. all these other world religions that you have, Islam, Buddhism, whatever, they're all based on works that you do to try to merit some kind of a standing with the spiritual world. True Christianity is a matter of faith that accepts the grace of God, because what can wash away my sins? Nothing but the blood of Jesus. You know, and if I'm thirsty and I want to drink of water, I don't turn on the faucet and say, whew, man, look at me, I turned on the faucet, got me some water. It's the water that quenches. It's not me turning it on. I just had sense enough to do that. Doctor gives you medicine that's going to make you better. You don't brag about it. I took the medicine. Look, good for you. You had a brain enough to do that. It's the medicine that had the effect, not what you did with it. Why people can't see that is beyond me. I just don't understand all of that. It's not a matter of your birth order. And Israel never could catch on to that when Jesus was trying to tell them, children of faith. Well, we're Abraham's children, he said in John 8. And he said, no, you're not. If you were Abraham's children, you'd listen to what I'm saying, you'd obey it. That got them mad. They thought birth lineage was enough. It's not. Never has been, never will be. Nothing that you can do in the flesh. But the other thing that stands out here and that's so powerful is the doctrine of adoption. It's so beautiful, so powerful, so relevant. And just like Ephraim and Manasseh, children born to an Egyptian woman who doesn't even believe in Jehovah God, we have been adopted through Jesus to be children of God. And that is just phenomenal. We certainly don't deserve it, do we? I mean, if you stop looking at it, well, I know who I am, I know where I've been, I know what I've done now, don't deserve it. But I'm sure grateful for the grace of God that makes life possible. And he wanted to adopt me. You know, if you hear some of the stories of children who have been adopted, they're just amazed that somebody would want them. They shouldn't be any more amazed than we are, that God would want me. In Ephesians 1, Paul talks about we inherit salvation. But then he talks about what God inherits in us. We are God's inheritance. And I look at my life and I think, God got a bum deal because of me. No, he says, I wanted you. Just let me take care of you and love you as my child. You're as much mine as anybody else. You're as much mine as my only begotten son, Jesus. That's phenomenal. That's phenomenal. So you got the promise of land, seed, covenant. We're gonna stop there a little bit with that, and we're gonna finish it up next week. And when I get into chapter 49, that's gonna be the third visit. Jacob calling his sons, not just Joseph, but all blessing. You might want to read through there and notice what he says to these sons in blessing them. There's some very interesting stuff. For example, Benjamin. Benjamin's a young guy. He's Joseph's little brother. Joseph was the favorite. Benjamin's the only other son born to his favorite wife. Look what he says about Benjamin. Benjamin's going to be a dude. It's not real positive what he has to say about Benjamin. Benjamin is a wolf. He tears his prey. In the morning he devours the prey, and in the evening he divides the plunder. Sweet little Benjamin, the little brother of Joseph. He's a wolf. Interesting. And the stuff he has to say about the others. So, okay, I'm going to stop there, and we will pick up and finish the rest of it next week. I thank you for your attention. Thank you for staying awake. Thank you for the questions and comments. That's good. Anything we need to make mention of, to announce to anybody or talk? Everything good? You got the Valentine's dinner coming up in February for whoever wants to be there. Okay. That's all I know of. I don't know of anybody who's in the hospital or sick or anything. Your lady is not with us tonight.
She was
Well, hope she got to listen online. Tell her we prayed for her. Very good. Very good.
Pray for my brother-in-law, Mitch.
Your brother-in-law,
Mitch
Mitch?
is gonna be going through some cancer treatment.
We will do that. We will do that. Let's pray. Father, I thank you for the time we've had to spend in your word, to learn a little bit more about things we've not studied, to be encouraged by things we needed to study, to realize the hope we can have as things are revealed to us in what we've studied. You're an amazing God. You bless us, you watch over us, you have a purpose for us. May we submit to your will according to your word. Help us to follow in the steps of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and Joseph and be faithful to your covenant, to understand that we belong somewhere else, we're headed somewhere else, and we're going there together. Please, Father, come back and get us soon. Maybe we won't have to experience death. But I ask you to watch over Miss Ann, help her to get well. Watch over Mitch to help him with all that he's going to be going through. And we thank you, Father. We ask you to give us leaders who will shepherd us like God. We ask you to give us teachers who will show us the Word of God so that we might live better before you. Guide us, Father, and help us to enjoy the blessings by living them on your terms. We ask for help in Jesus' name. Amen. Have a good evening, folks. Yeah. And sir, what is your name?
Tyler Ray.
Tyler Ray. I'm David Nestor. Pleased to meet you.
Nice to meet you, sir.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Like the mustache.
Thank you. Thank you so much. How are you, sir? Good. I'm Kevin. Tyler. Nice to meet you.
I'm Vicky.
Nice to meet you. Tyler Ray. Nice to meet you. Yes, sir. I'm new in town. I just got to Albuquerque Sunday evening. I'm working at the Intel facility over there. Yes, sir. Where are you from? So I'm originally from a small town in West Texas, but my wife and I have been living in Austin for the last couple of years.
What small town, West Texas?